Okay, well, I think we're going to get started again. That was a very informative session, and what a wonderful keynote from the UN's Assistant Secretary General. It's so let's with that, I'm going to come back to the next item on our agenda, which is the introduction to the Principles for Responsible Investment, of which CalPERS is a founding member. And I'll turn it back over to you, Ted.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mather. So welcome back to everyone to this second exciting segment of the investment portion of today's day. We're really turning now to focus on the principles for responsible investment. Everything seems to have an acronym, so the PRI. And as a setup and framework for our distinguished guest presentation on the PRI, we will be reviewing CalPERS' own history and our own role with the principles of responsible investment to give the board all a sort of equal understanding and refresher as to our history with PRI. I'll be turning that over to Anne to go through that history briefly, and after that I will more formally introduce our guest presenter, Ophir Bruck, who's from the PRI's North America. He's the PRI's North America Network Manager, and he will set out PRI's vision for the future, the 10-year blueprint, which has gone through a number of consultations amongst the signatories of PRI over the course of the last few years. I will turn this over now to Anne to walk through CalPERS' own decision almost 10 years ago now to join the PRI as a signatory, and that was actually 10 years ago, about the time that I joined CalPERS staff as the head of real estate at that time. And I remember working with a number of the members of CalPERS, and in particular our former CEO at that time, Ann Stausball, to really help craft the language around fiduciary duty in the statement of responsibility by signatories. So I think it's very important. It's been important for CalPERS, and we're excited to renew our next 10-year effort with the PRI. So with that, Anne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed your tea break. That was really a wonderful session, and just to echo Ted's thanks, warm, personal, and CalPERS thanks for making this journey. I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion with you. We're also very grateful, as Ted says, for Ophir to come and speak about the PRI's blueprint. But we thought, as past is prologue, we would spend a few minutes just going back to the beginning and explaining what the principles of responsible investment are, which CalPERS signed up for, one of the founding signatories, and actually, as Ted said, helped to craft the language. And Ted has a legal background, so I know that carefully crafted language on fiduciary duty, I feel, has actually given the principles traction in the financial markets, because we're not talking about either or, we're talking about and. We're talking about this issue and how it supports our fiduciary duty, which is prudence, loyalty, and care. And being careful, being loyal, and being prudent means attending to these risks and opportunities. So I have yet another go at pointing in the right direction. Ah, wonderful. So this slide, which you have in your packets, really just gives you a little history. So in early 2005, we were invited, or CalPERS was invited by the then UN Secretary General to join an investor working group to develop a set of global best practice principles for responsible investment. And I think the inspiration here was looking at how the Global Compact had really provided a focus for the business community, for companies who wanted to better understand their responsibilities, but also what the standards of good practice would be as companies. So the idea of a similar initiative for investors, I think, is what inspired this work. The board of CalPERS the following year considered the work that had come out of that working group of investors, where CalPERS was joined by others from around the world to put heads together and think, what do we mean by being a responsible investor? And the board voted and approved CalPERS being one of the first signatories. And then the following month, the principles were publicly launched, and there was a signing ceremony and a ringing of the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Was that you there, Priya? Yes, I remember the photograph. That's rather lovely. So here's our new president of CalPERS, was there at the ringing of the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And that's a very appropriate venue. It was an investment venue. It wasn't launched at the UN. And I think that sent a very strong signal that this is about finance. At that point, there were 32, not quite 36, 32 investors with $2 trillion. I believe now the PRI has over 1,000.
Just under 2,000.
That is over 1,000. But I haven't given you full credit. You're nearly 2,000 signatories. That's extraordinary. And, all right, you're going to have to update me on the trillions. I was going to say 70. Is that too few?
You're right.
Oh, we got that right. So 70 trillion. So it's wonderful to see how this initiative has really mobilized investors and been a place to work, think, exchange ideas, be practical, but stay investors. The fiduciary duty is still a critical part of it all. So the next slides I won't dwell on. Well, we'll find one first, shall we? The first principle, CalPERS has this as part of its strategic plan. We will incorporate ESG issues into investment analysis and decision-making processes. And we're really at this work in earnest now through the Manager Expectations project. The second, I think this is something CalPERS believed in for many years. We will be active owners. And I think CalPERS started with the G, the governance issues. And now what we're finding is incorporating environmental and social issues into engagement is helpful. And I do want to say that in our research that we mentioned earlier, we have found research coming through, an Elroy Dimpson paper that was published and won the Markowitz Prize, which shows that companies which are engaged on environmental and social issues improve their financial performance. And it's that type of evidence that really keeps us laser focused on returns and paying pensions. The next principle, we will seek, so polite, we will seek appropriate disclosure. And really this is our focus we've been talking about on data and corporate reporting. You can't measure what you can't manage, as Marcy reminded me over breakfast. If you don't know what's going on and it's all mysterious and it's all a bit of a guess, we won't make progress. So this was there from the beginning. Principle 4, we'll promote acceptance and implementation. So in other words, we're going to share our experience and best practices around the industry. 5, we'll work together. I think that theme of partnership has run throughout the discussion this morning. But we know as large global investors we're diversified, so sometimes we have a small piece of everything, and working together to share tools, pool resources, make use of learning from each other is still a very important part of everything we do, everything that the PRI gives us. And finally, and then I want to turn to Divya, we will report on our activities and progress. And until recently, this was a bit of a haphazard affair. It was everything from a press release to a webinar to here's a full report. But the PRI in recent years has developed quite a rigorous reporting framework. So you can't, it's not quite like doing SATs on responsible investment, but it is a very rigorous framework. And we've given you on the next slide a sample. It's like the CalPERS report card. It's the CalPERS report card from 2017. Now, how do we get judged to be A+? We're very proud to be A+. I think it puts us as one of 8 out of the 2,000, nearly 2,000. So this is actually a very high grade. We don't sit on our laurels. We know we're working hard and there's a lot here, but I'd just like to turn to Divya to explain, well, what does this mean? How do you go through a huge $350 billion portfolio with internal and external managers and different asset classes and come to any conclusion about the quality of the work that we're doing in this space? So Divya, over to you.
Thank you,
to
and I'll
explain
just
it all.
touch quickly on this before we turn it over to Ophir, but each year the PRI issues a reporting and assessment framework, and depending on the structure of each member's portfolio, we are asked to report on different modules within the framework. And so what the framework allows us to do is review the policies, the practices that support ESG integration at multiple levels of the organization, and really look asset class by asset class on the progress that we have made. So this is quite an undertaking, I have to say, each year, and I'm grateful to the collaboration we have with each of the asset classes, because it does require some detailed analysis from each of them into, for example, the companies that they're engaging, their conversations with managers. And for each claim that you make, of course, it would be easy for any asset owner to just in 10 minutes say, yes, I'm doing all of this, A+. But you actually have to go through and provide evidence of the claims that you are making. And so there's quite a bit of collaboration with the asset classes from January through March every year, where we go through and sort of go through a detailed process of asking questions, reviewing our notes, and coming back with the responses. So we're pleased that we have scored well, but we do know that this is a target that evolves each year as the ESG industry progresses, and so look forward to continuing our progress there.
Yes, thank you very much, Anne and Divya. And with that, we'll turn to a presentation by Ophir Brook. As I mentioned, he's responsible for the U.S. network of PRI, a proud graduate of UC Berkeley. Very happy to see that here in our home state. In addition to a previous part of his career as the Sustainable Investment Analyst at the UC office of the Chief Investment Office, where he led UC's development and implementation of their responsible investment framework for the university's endowment, pension, and retirement savings and working capital accounts, among other things. So with that, Ophir, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation. How's the volume? Good. And thank you, Anne, Divya, for the wonderful tee-up. I didn't see those slides ahead of time, so I think it actually segues perfectly and helps provide a great context for my comments. So as Ted mentioned, I am part of the U.S. Networks team, and I actually oversee the Western U.S. region for the PRI. And I came on about a year ago. Previously, as Ted mentioned, I was at the University of California Office of the CIO, where they were grappling with many of the same questions that this board grapples with around sustainability and questions around climate change that beneficiaries are bringing up, et cetera. So I'm going to focus my comments on our 10-year strategic blueprint. And I'm going to first kind of set the context. As Anne and Divya pointed out, it is in no small part thanks to CalPERS that the PRI exists today as an organization. And PRI has to date played a significant role in guiding the PRI's work over the last 12 years of our existence. And you mentioned that photograph. If I had a slide deck today, I'll blame that on the holidays for not having one. But it would begin indeed with that photograph of your very own and our very own Priya incoming President Priya Mather standing next to then former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and the group of global founding PRI signatories at the New York Stock Exchange. So that was in 2006. 12 years later, the PRI has grown to become the world's leading responsible investment initiative and the largest institutional investor network focused on responsible investment. Just yesterday, in fact, we hit that 1,900 signatory milestone. Just under 2,000, that's where the just under 2,000 number came from. And our signatory base collectively manages, as Anne mentioned, just over 70 trillion in assets collectively. The US is the PRI's single largest market in terms of absolute number of signatories and assets represented between them. Our US signatory base currently numbers 37 asset owners, 271 investment managers, and 48 service providers for a total of 356 signatories. And that is a drop in the bucket relative to, the market size. So the penetration is still very nascent. And the PRI's growth in signatories, both globally and in the US, has really come alongside our growth as an organization and in our staff size specifically. Today, the PRI has just over 100 staff located, headquartered in London and located in 8 countries around the world. In 2015, we opened our US office based in New York. And today we have 8 US-based staff located in New York, DC, and San Francisco. So having a US-based team has allowed the PRI to significantly grow the quantity and quality of our engagements with our signatory base here, as well as to grow that signatory base. Some recent new additions to our signatory base includes the San Francisco Employee Retirement System, the Seattle City Employee Retirement System, the Skoll Foundation, Mercy Health, Voya Financial, Oppenheimer Funds, just to name a few. And our staff of 100 is split into 7 teams, again, headquartered in London. And I'd like to quickly go over each of those teams, both for the benefit of our new CalPERS board members, and maybe a useful refresher for those already familiar with the PRI's work. And it'll also help contextualize the discussion around our blueprint and our 10-year vision. It'll be a helpful backdrop. So the 7 teams, very quickly, we have our investment practices team, which consists of a set of asset class experts that publish guidance on responsible investment across asset classes. That team continues to grow. We're pretty much covering every asset class save real assets, which is a strategy that we are in the process of launching, which includes timber, agriculture, and real estate. And within the investment practices team, we have a specific team focused on asset owners. It's called our Asset Owner Insight team, and I'll talk more about that later. Our ESG engagements team is the team that facilitates collaborative shareholder engagements. And that was really one of the first purposes of the PRI, if you will, was to be a convener and to really facilitate these collaborative engagements with investees. And one of the key ways we did that was through something called our collaboration platform, which is an online platform that acts as a clearinghouse for all the engagements led both by the PRI and by our signatory base. Our reporting and assessment team, Divya touched on the very, sometimes non-enjoyable reporting process, but it also thorough. Thank you, comprehensive. It also is, it is the most comprehensive responsible investment reporting framework out there, and we collect a wealth of data that, is useful to really gauge the state of affairs and where we need to focus our resources as an organization. But the process itself, and Divya can probably attest to this too, is also a useful exercise as a signatory reporting in that it enables you to see what kind of questions the PRI is asking of you, where you're at, to benchmark yourself year on year to yourself and to your peers in the space. And that reporting framework is a living framework. It's constantly evolving. I'll get into some of that a little bit later. Our policy team is the team that leads our work on fiduciary duty, which has been cited a few times today. In 2015, released a seminal report titled Fiduciary Duty in the 21st Century that I think is worth disseminating to the board, since there's a lot in there that addresses some of the questions that came up today. And our policy team also does a lot of really good work working with policymakers and regulators around the world on hard and soft policies and regulations to create an enabling regulatory environment that supports responsible investment and ultimately the pursuit of a sustainable global financial system, which is the PRI's mission. Our academic research team partners with academics around the world. We have a network of over 3,000 academics that, together we publish peer-reviewed research on responsible investment, put together an annual academic network conference. Our PRI Academy is an online educational platform that offers CFA-accredited courses in responsible investment. We just, a couple of months ago, launched our 4th course that is tailored to trustees, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. And finally, our global networks and outreach team is the team I'm part of, and it's the regional presence of the PRI. It's where it consists of network managers that are responsible for keeping our signatories happy, engaged, and informed, and also for growing our signatory base. So with that, I mentioned I don't have a slide deck today, but in your packet, there were 2 attachments. One of them was on the SDGs. The other was on the blueprint. So I'll ask you to pull up the one on the blueprint, because it for all intents and purposes, serves as a slide deck, and I can reference pages that I'm referring to. So I'll ask you to turn to page 6 in that, if you have it up in front of you. And so with the contextualizing of the discussion around the blueprint, I just want to quickly go over the PRI's mission, as again, it sets the stage and will be referenced throughout the blueprint. So bear with me here. I'm just going to read it off to you. Quote, "The PRI believes that an economically efficient, sustainable global financial system is a necessity for long-term value creation. Such a system will reward long-term responsible investment and benefit the environment and society as a whole. The PRI will work to achieve this sustainable global financial system by encouraging adoption of the principles and collaboration on their implementation, by fostering good governance, integrity, and accountability, and by addressing obstacles to a sustainable financial system that lie within market practices, structures, and regulation." So that's our mission. In 2016, the PRI turned 10, and we decided to undertake a deep review and assessment of our success as an organization in relationship to our overarching mission and to the work we do every day to understand the investment implications of ESG issues and to support our signatories in incorporating these as factors into their investment and ownership decisions. So we began with a review of PRI's impact over the past 10 years, using an independent consulting firm to do so. The review highlighted the PRI's significant role in building a global responsible investment community and bringing responsible investment closer to the mainstream. The review also highlighted how the growth and diversification of our signatory base over time means that we need highlights that we need stronger accountability mechanisms that acknowledge this diversity, as well as an overarching strategy to bring responsible investment firmly into the mainstream. So over the course of a year and a half, we took that input and we garnered feedback on strategic elements that came out of that review through global signatory and stakeholder surveys and 2 major signatory consultations. One on accountability and on how the PRI can fulfill its mission of creating a sustainable financial system. And these consultations included regional workshops around the world, webinars, and written feedback. All in all, we received input from nearly 2,000 individuals from over 520 organizations, accounting for over half of our signatory base at the time. These activities culminated in the launch of this blueprint, which sets the direction of our work for the next 10 years. So I'll ask you to flip to page 3 in that blueprint document. So what is the overall vision of the blueprint? The blueprint focuses on 3 areas of impact: responsible investors, sustainable markets, and a prosperous world for all. We see these three concepts as inextricably linked. Within these three overarching areas of impact, there are 9 priority areas that the blueprint focuses on and the actions that the PRI will take to ensure each objective is met. I'll explain what each of these 3 areas of impact focuses on and the 9 priority areas that fall under each. And that'll form the bulk of the rest of this presentation. So the areas of impact, responsible investors. What do we mean by that? Responsible investors focuses on strengthening, deepening, and expanding our core work, which is to lead responsible investors in their pursuit of long-term value and to enhance alignment throughout the investment chain. As part of this work, we will empower asset owners, support investors in incorporating ESG issues, foster a community of active owners, showcase leadership and increase accountability, and convene and educate responsible investors. The second area of impact is sustainable markets, which focuses on addressing the unsustainable aspects of the markets that investors operate in and achieving the economically efficient, sustainable global financial system that responsible investors and beneficiaries need. So as part of that work, we will challenge barriers to a sustainable financial system and drive meaningful data throughout markets. I'm going to get into all these in more detail. The third, a prosperous world for all. That focuses on enabling signatories to improve the real world, now and in the future, by encouraging investments that contribute to prosperous and inclusive societies for current and future generations. We want to see a world in which pensions allow people to retire with dignity. As part of this work, we will champion climate action and enable real-world impact aligned with the SDGs. So let's explore each of these 9 areas in greater depth. Page 8. First area of focus, empower asset owners. So asset owners sit at the top of the investment chain and set the direction of markets. The mandates of asset owners awarded to managers and the engagement they have with their managers determine the objectives that the world's biggest pools of capital are put to. To fulfill their duties to beneficiaries, asset owners will need robust approaches to investment that prudently integrate material ESG considerations into investment and ownership decisions, generate and preserve long-term value, and acknowledge the effects their investments have on the real economy and the societies in which they operate and in which their beneficiaries live. So to empower asset owners, the PRI will take the following actions. We will, A, drive ESG incorporation throughout organizations from strategy, policies, and trustee capacity through to portfolio and plan level decisions, such as asset allocation. So I mentioned earlier in London we have an asset owner insights team dedicated to guiding asset owners through the responsible investment journey. And that group has published guidance on integrating responsible investment into investment policy, beliefs, and strategy development. And that team will continue creating resources tailored to asset owners. We also just launched, as I mentioned, a responsible investment course tailored to trustees through our online educational platform. And that again ties into improving trustee capacity to embed these issues into the plan's strategy. B, we will enable asset owners to effectively oversee and monitor investment managers, consultants, and others in order to meet their responsibilities to beneficiaries. A key tool as part of that goal is a tool that we released over the summer that we call our data portal. And it came out of the desire from our asset owner signatories to be able to better utilize the outputs from our reporting, specifically from our investment managers reporting through the PRI framework, to use those outputs in their due diligence processes, in their manager selection, appointment, and monitoring. And so the data portal allows asset owners to do that in a more user-friendly way and to make best use of those reporting outputs. And our investment practices team continues to publish guidance on incorporating ESG considerations into the manager selection, appointment, and monitoring processes across asset classes. For example, we recently launched the industry's first ESG due diligence questionnaire for hedge funds, and we're going to be following that up with a more comprehensive guide on ESG integration in hedge funds. Lastly, we will determine the long-term global trends that will shape the investment environment of tomorrow. Last month, PRI published a comprehensive report with Willis Towers Watson, which examines key mega trends that are impacting the global economy, financial system, and our ability to achieve the SDGs. I said lastly, but this is lastly. We will establish that asset owners' duties to their beneficiaries extend beyond the risk-return profile of their investments to include making decisions that benefit the world beneficiaries live in. This includes our continuing work on clarifying fiduciary duties in key markets and working with regulators and policymakers to create that enabling environment for investors to consider the full remit of their fiduciary duties. I'm also paying attention to the time. Tell me how fast I should talk.
Maybe
a little
bit
faster.
faster.
All right. I don't want to hold you back from lunch.
May
All
I
right.
suggest
Yeah,
perhaps
please,
that we, since everyone has this document,
Yeah.
you don't need to read each of the
Right.
bullets perhaps, and maybe give some high-level examples of how
Yep.
how we're doing it. Thanks.
Sounds good. So the second piece is that we will support investors incorporating ESG issues, page 9. So some of the ways we're going to do that is to continue facilitating ESG incorporation in asset classes that have high penetration already, such as listed equity. In 2016, we published a comprehensive guide on ESG integration in listed equity investing. Last year, we partnered with the CFA Institute on a global study looking at the state of ESG integration in listed equity and fixed income investing and identifying challenges and best practices. It's going to be launched later this year at PRI in person, which is taking place in San Francisco, our annual conference. We are going to continue building ESG incorporation capacity in underserved asset classes, if you will. So commodities, hedge funds, and other asset classes where penetration is not as high. I mentioned our work on hedge funds. We also recently launched an infrastructure work stream and are currently consulting on a real asset strategy, as I mentioned. Page 10, third, create an industry of active owners. So here, what I want to highlight is that our work is going to focus on really mainstreaming active ownership and making it a standard part of responsible investment practice. And a key part of that is that this quarter we're going to be launching, I've used the word comprehensive again, but our most comprehensive guide on implementing Principle 2 active ownership in both listed equities and fixed income. We feel this is going to be a critical tool to facilitate particularly our newer signatories and those sort of figuring out what does it mean to be an active owner. And it's going to cover all aspects of active ownership, from voting to setting up a policy to rules around acting in concert, et cetera. And we're going to continue coordinating collaborative engagements. The Climate Action 100 Plus, which Divya did such a great job of highlighting, and which CalPERS has obviously played a central role in developing, is a great example of this work, in that it truly brings together an investor network around the world that is coordinated and has a clear agenda and progress tracking mechanisms. And on the collaboration platform, I'll mention that we're doing a whole revamp to the collaboration platform as we speak, which is set to be completed this year. Again, a key tool for our signatories. Page 11, showcasing leadership and increasing accountability. I want to spend a couple of minutes here. A key message that emerged from our consultation was around the need for stronger accountability mechanisms that simultaneously recognize the diversity of our signatory base in terms of size, geography, focus, and stage of responsible investment implementation, while also ensuring that progress is being made and that being a PRI signatory is more than a marketing exercise. And so on that end of the stick, we are implementing a set of minimum standards that we just launched a couple of months ago that we are expecting our signatories to meet and giving them 2 years to do so. And on the flip side, in the spirit of collaboration and progress, we're simultaneously going to celebrate best practices and showcase leadership that's being made across the spectrum. And so I won't delve into the minimum standards unless folks want to hear what they are. You're definitely don't have to worry about it, Anne. We do have 200 signatories, though, that we have identified as in some form not meeting those standards. And so we're going to be engaging with them over a 2-year period to help them get there by 2020. On showcasing leadership, we're figuring out the details of what that's going to look like, but we're going to have a nomination-based awards program. And later this year, we'll announce details on how we're going to be showcasing leadership across aspects of responsible investment. 5th, page 12, convening and educating responsible investors. I mentioned the PRI Academy. We are going to continue partnering with folks like Kaya and the CFA Institute on embedding responsible investment in existing educational curriculums. And also the hope is to do more collaboration with regional networks like the California Trustee Network, CalPERS, SACRS, et cetera, to really, again, embed our expertise into existing educational curriculums. And as well, we're going to be, this is important to mention, that we're going to be reaching out to new markets and specifically establishing a strong Asian signatory base is a goal, having more signatories in developing markets, and achieving penetration rates in North America never previously seen outside of Europe. And so that's why we've created this team in the U.S. That's why we've hired our first China-based U.S. network manager and an Africa and Middle East network manager as well. We have, as I mentioned, an explicit focus on building our asset owner community. We'll continue focusing on that. Page 13, we're going to challenge barriers to a more sustainable financial system. Again, another important piece that I want to just spend a minute on. As I mentioned, a core part of the PRI's stated mission is to create a sustainable global financial system. And what we're going to do is work on the parts of the system where we can make a difference as the PRI, which includes investors, their advisors and service providers, companies and issuers, securities exchanges and regulators. And we're going to monitor environmental, social, technological, economic, and political trends that continue to shape the financial system as we work. So following our signatory consultation, we've prioritized 9 key risks and challenges that could undermine a sustainable financial system, and have selected a series of 8 projects that we are undertaking this year that will address several of these key risks and challenges. This work falls under our newly created Sustainable Financial System program, and some of these projects are already underway. For example, last month we published an investment consultants services review, which highlights the critical role investment consultants play in mainstreaming responsible investment practices. And our megatrends work that I mentioned earlier is also part of this program. Page 14, and the 7th of 9 key areas of focus, we're almost there, is to drive meaningful data throughout markets. Ted mentioned this earlier, that data is a challenge, and reliable, timely information is crucial for investors to accurately price and assess risk. And in that context, the PRI will advocate for meaningful, forward-looking, and globally comparable company investor disclosure. And I am reading these ones straight from there because I think they're important to kind of say out loud. Promote the inclusion of material ESG information alongside other financial data. Encourage consolidation of reporting standards and regimes. There are a lot of them out there. Develop the PRI reporting framework to measure the contribution that responsible investment makes to tangible ESG improvements in the real world. And enhance the data portal that I mentioned earlier. Our work on the TCFD is an excellent example of putting this into action. Our chair, Martin Schenke, sits on the TCFD, and we've been intimately involved in the process of developing the TCFD's recommendations. We're actively promoting their adoption through not only company engagement, but also through integrating the recommendations themselves into the PRI's reporting framework. So to that end, we've introduced a set of 4 new climate indicators that include up to 20 climate-related questions within the strategy and governance module of the PRI reporting framework that Divya is going to enjoy filling out this year. Page 15, championing climate action. I have 2 minutes. All right. So climate change has been repeatedly identified by our signatories as a top ESG concern and an area we should prioritize. Doing a lot of work there. In the coming months, we're going to undertake a signatory consultation on our climate action plan. So stay tuned there. We're going to continue collaborating with our UN partners and networks such as CDP and Ceres and others. 9, and the last area of focus, page 16, we will enable real-world impact aligned with the SDGs. So there's a lot to say here. What I will flag is that it is very early days in the pursuit of understanding what the SDGs mean for investors. So we came out with a 5-point plan around the SDGs, and you know, as well as an advisory committee that CalPERS sits on and co-chairs. And that 5-point plan, I'll just quickly run through it. The first is creating a landscape map, so mapping what the investment world is already doing on the SDGs. And so we've created a living online library of investor activity that is split into 2 lists, resources and initiatives. The second piece is around making the investment case and clarifying why investors should care about the SDGs. So we released a paper, it's in your packet as well, which was launched in September, that highlights 5 key reasons the SDGs are relevant to investors, including fiduciary duty, macro risks and opportunities, and the opportunity to utilize the SDGs as a risk, capital allocation, and impact framework. The question of fiduciary duty was a question raised earlier, I think it was by Teresa, in relative to SDGs. And beyond materiality, we're really thinking about the world in which beneficiaries retire into as an aspect of fiduciary duty, and thinking about that in the context of the SDGs. And I encourage you to read the paper, since I don't have time to dig into too much of it right now. The third piece of the 5-point plan, integrating the SDGs into capital allocation guidance, so how to invest in SDGs. The Assistant Secretary General spoke really well to the necessity of private capital to step up and finance the SDGs. And so this is going to involve our work in highlighting what the opportunity sets are, of which there are many, help identify pipelines, and really highlight the opportunity set that this new framework that are the SDGs unlocks. 4, SDGs and active ownership, almost there. We're going to release a paper in Q3 focusing on how the SDGs can become a part of active ownership practices and engagement. And lastly, reporting on the SDGs. We're going to publish guidance on how signatories report on the SDGs later this year, and it's going to be integrated into our PRI reporting framework in next year's reporting cycle. Again, this work is nascent. It's beginning. We're all trying to figure it out. There are some examples of best practices. I'll particularly highlight work that's coming out of the Netherlands, where a coalition of Dutch companies, investors, and the Dutch Central Bank have come together to create a framework for investing in and measuring progress towards the SDGs. I think that was cited earlier. And what they've done is they've created a definition for sustainable development investments, or SDIs. And they've produced 2 useful tools. One is SDG taxonomies, so really looking at which SDGs are investable, which aren't investable, and then listing what the key investable sub-indicators and industries are within each goal that can contribute to most to achieving that goal. And then the second tool is SDG indicators. So for each goal, they've proposed metrics that would be used to measure the impact of investment. So the question of metrics came up earlier. Happy to share these resources with the board so you can kind of dig further into that and understand how in these nascent stages some investors, some asset owners are conceptualizing the SDGs as a framework and the metrics that are going to be used to track impact relative to the SDGs. If you'd like, I can stop there. And if you'd like, I can keep talking forever.
I think that's a good stopping point for questions and answers, and turn it back over to Ms. Mather. I just think it's worth underscoring the early stage and nascent part of your discussion on SDGs. I think investors, this is very, very, very early innings for most investors to start the process of thinking through what does it mean, and the PRI can play such an important convening role, such an important resource of both information and viewpoints that will inform us as we move forward. But there isn't a ready-made answer to how to implement this yet, and I think it will evolve over time, much like the past 10 years we've seen the principles of responsible investing, evolve amongst the financial community, investment community.
Thank you. I think we do have some questions in the committee. Ms. Brown, from the board, rather.
Thank you. Being new, I'll just say I'd like to maybe get a little alphabet soup, the acronyms. I know KPI, SDG, NGO, is that non-governmental organization? I don't know, I'm guessing.
Yep.
Okay,
You're right.
UNEP. So again, it'd be nice. You said something about TC, something. So
Yeah.
for those of us
Yes.
who don't live this
I
day
hear
in and
you.
day out, it'd be helpful to have that, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. I think we can provide some kind of glossary, but just for your information right now, I think it was mentioned by the Assistant UN Secretary General earlier, but the TCFD is the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure. And UNEP is the UN Environmental Program. and
UNEP-FI is their finance initiative.
Is their finance initiative.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe it'd be helpful to just provide you with a glossary. Maybe if there, I imagine there might be other board members for whom that would be useful as well. Thanks for raising that.
That way I'll pass the quiz after lunch. Thank you.
No problem. It is something we need to
Definitely an
work on
alphabet soup.
here. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions? Ms. Taylor?
So I just wanted to make sure that we did get the paper on the fiduciary duty, because I don't think we have it in our books here, so it'd be nice if we could get that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll make sure that goes around. Ms. Yee?
Sorry, I was just curious. So this chart, and I'm going back to the 2017 PRI assessment of CalPERS. I don't think I've seen this chart before, but I was curious as to whether we've hit above the median in prior years, and then also on the 3 fixed income categories where it shows not reported. Just curious about what those were or why.
Sure. So I can check into our scoring in previous years. I can't comment at this second of whether it was always above the median. On fixed income or really any asset class, the reporting and assessment framework guides investors to complete those portions as relevant to the structure of your portfolio, so it depends on the percentage of assets invested in a particular way. So,
So less
There's
than
a 10%
10%
threshold.
threshold, yeah.
right,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's likely that those not reported just didn't
Didn't
open
make-
up for
uh-huh.
us because we're not
Got it.
significantly invested in those
Okay,
asset
good.
classes.
And then I suppose that also going forward as we look at SDG investment tools, we'll also sort out kind of roles and responsibilities. I mean, I guess my question to OPIR and PRI is, will you take a role with respect to helping to identify and vet some of these investment opportunities?
You know, I think the PRI kind of stays one step removed from making any investment recommendations, but we get pretty close to helping identify the field and acting as a platform through which, we can connect the right players with each other in order to make investment opportunities happen. But when I said a pipeline, I didn't mean it literally in terms of here are the opportunities. Yeah. Does that?
Is that helpful? Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? Comments from the board? Well, thank you very much. Any concluding remarks, Mr. Leopoulos?
Just next steps, I think, is on the list. I'm ready for that when
Okay.
you are,
Yeah.
Madam Chair. Okay. Well, I think we heard quite an introduction to this new development around SDGs from the UN and the nascent area for responsible investors to think through what are the implications and usefulness of the SDGs in an investment decision-making process. So going forward, we've really considered 3 options how to move for a next step. Trying to read through the comfortability and discussion of board members today as well. I think the 3 options that we have is, one, we certainly will continue to do, option A, we'll continue exploring this area both with the UN and with PRI, and track along with the milestones by, in this case, the PRI and other investors as we assimilate and think through the information that's provided through the UN and the SDG process. So the first option really is we will continue, as an investment office, continue to work on these themes and be bringing you back information really along the timeline of how the PRI progresses on this topic. Second option is for us to do some more work between now and the offsite, the July offsite, really to look at the connection or connectivity between our own strategic plan that we discussed and the SDGs, taking into due consideration the PRI's evolving analysis and other investors' analysis, and bring back a framework discussion, really comparing our own strategic plan to the framework of the SDGs, and use that to inform the discussion at the July offsite of other investors and how other investors are viewing that lens. So it's a little bit more work than option 1. The investment staff will go back and do some mapping between the 2 frameworks. That is some more work for us to do, but we think it could be useful work for us to do to prepare the board, prepare for the board in the offsite in July. The last option really would be if there was a strong viewpoint, and I don't know that I heard that today, but a strong viewpoint that this wasn't an area of interest for our board, wasn't an area of interest to explore these dimensions in our investment decision making, then we would not bring back a panel in July, and we'd really continue our work through the PRI and our partnerships, and otherwise execute on our ESG strategic plan as developed. So if I had to look at next steps, looking for direction, Madam President, option A, continue as we are. We'll bring a panel of other investors to talk about implications of the SDGs in July. Option 2, direct us to spend some time and resources to begin the initial connection between the SDGs and our own ESG strategic plan, and use that to help inform the discussion at a July offsite. Option 3, you've heard enough information on the SDGs for now and the work, and you're comfortable with our current strategic plan, and not bring back a discussion in July. Those are the next step options.
Thank you. Well, I heard Ms. Yee raise earlier option 2, which is mapping our efforts to the SDGs. I think I've heard appetite for that in the comments I've heard today. So unless I hear opposition, and I see Mr. Lind, you raising your hand.
Not for opposition, but I'm raising my hand. I support the plan too, the work. I think we all have an interest in pursuing that. But I also wanted to get a little more specific, since this agenda item really does say about topics for review in March and in July. And Teresa brought it up earlier today. I haven't said anything in several months about it, but I would like to suggest that we consider in July having the discussion around action plan, if warranted, around income inequality. At least start to have that discussion. Not saying that we need to develop an action plan in July, but at least start to have the discussion so we see that that is calendared and we're starting to work on it. So that would be my request or suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Lind. Ms. Taylor and then Ms. Yee.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'll chime in with Ron there and say that, yes, I'd love to see. I thought we did our research and had completed it on income inequality or wealth inequality, and I want to make sure we're including both. I said that earlier. So I would like to see what that research garnered for us, if we can bring that forward, and then be looking at inclusiveness in our SDGs, et cetera. And I know that we're stretched to the bone, so I just sort of want to know where our research went on that. I also wanted to, I think it's really important that in March we bring back sort of a communication strategy, because around our fiduciary duty and how this fits in to our fiduciary duty, so that we are answering to our stakeholders much more succinctly. I think we're kind of unclear around that, and I think a lot of our stakeholders come and speak to us and talk about that we shouldn't be involving ourselves in this, not understanding we're not changing an investment strategy entirely. We are looking at long-term investment strategy, which has always been what we do, and I think it's very important that we have some sort of communication strategy that will help us in, and bring that back in March for us so that we can look at it, so that we can present that to our stakeholders, get some clarity on what that means for us and the stakeholders. I think the Deputy Secretary General talked about it. You've talked about our fiduciary duty and how the clarity around some of these long-term strategies really do impact our risk and our return. So how we do that, what kind of strategy, I don't know if you want to involve Brad on that, but I think it's really important that we do that so that our stakeholders feel like we're answering their questions as well.
Thank you. Ms. Yee.
I also share the interest on really delving into income inequality, but I'm a little worried about that particular issue potentially bogging down this effort. And so maybe a suggestion, and I'm excited about the panel that we're going to have this afternoon on investing in an age of technology, but I'm wondering if the income inequality discussion might be done in tandem to what I would like to see at the offsite, and that is we're going to be focused on opportunities with technological disruption, but maybe focusing some time at the July offsite on some of the challenges and issues that are attendant to potentially exacerbating things like inequality. Because it's a little bit more of a focused discussion, less about kind of broad-reaching range discussion. I think maybe have some specifics, and a lot's been written around it, so I think we can bring some thought leaders in to actually talk about it, along with bringing back the study.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So I've heard 3 votes for number 2, and not every board member needs to weigh in, but unless I hear opposition, that's the direction we will go in. Thank you. Any other comments from the board before we break for lunch? Well, I really want to thank Mr. Bruck for sharing where PRI has been and where we're heading over the next decade. And we're going to take a 1-hour break for lunch now, so we'll come back at 1:30. Thanks, everyone.